Maya Johnson, a 17-year-old black girl, stepped off the yellow bus and onto the familiar grounds of Summit High School, ready to face her senior year. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she fought to keep her composure. The school seemed just like any other she had attended. Large, brick buildings and crowded hallways filled with students. Maya was used to the feeling of being the new kid, the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit in. She had transferred schools countless times. Always a girl from somewhere else, always the one who stood out because of her skin color. And in a predominantly white school like this, that difference was glaring. Her goal for the year was simple: blend in, keep her head down, and get through this final chapter of high school without making waves. Maya's father, a former fighter who had trained her in discipline and self-control, had always told her that the best way to protect herself in a world full of judgment was to be invisible, to move quietly and leave no trace. She carried that advice with her as she walked through the crowded halls of Summit High, trying her best not to attract attention. She gripped the straps of her backpack tightly, her eyes focused on the ground, avoiding anyone's gaze. But no matter how hard she tried to remain unseen, Maya couldn't ignore the stares. The whispers that started as faint, almost inaudible murmurs gradually grew louder as she passed by groups of students. Maya knew those stares were inevitable. The question that went unasked, the doubts in their eyes, all because of her appearance. It was nothing new, just another day of being the outsider, the enigma they couldn't quite understand. Yet, she didn't let it break her. Maya continued moving forward, determined to stay quiet and unnoticed, just as she had learned to do for years. Ashley Adams, a 17-year-old girl with porcelain skin and striking blonde hair, walked into Summit High School like a queen entering her court. Every step she took seemed to command the attention of the entire hallway, her expensive plaid dress hugging her slender frame perfectly. She walked with an air of confidence so intense that it almost felt like she was daring the world to challenge her. To anyone who had been in the school long enough, it was clear that Ashley was at the top of the social hierarchy. She wasn't just popular. She was the one who controlled the unspoken rules of Summit High. Ashley's clique was infamous, made up of her two best friends, Brianna and Courtney, who always stood loyally by her side. Brianna, with her fiery red hair and sharp gaze, was always quick to identify potential threats to Ashley's reign, while Courtney, the quieter one, had an uncanny ability to gather information and keep secrets. Together, they formed a solid foundation around Ashley, protecting her from any challenges. But what truly cemented Ashley's power at Summit High was her brother, Zach Adams. Zach was the star of the school's football team, a towering figure with broad shoulders and a smile that could charm anyone. His popularity and physical strength made him untouchable in the eyes of most students. His presence alone was enough to make anyone think twice before crossing Ashley or her group. Zach wasn't just Ashley's older brother. He was a protector, always ready to back her up when she needed to assert her dominance. And then there was Luke Rodriguez, a lanky yet dangerous figure in Ashley's circle. He had a mischievous grin that made people uneasy, and while no one knew exactly where he stood in relation to Ashley or Zach, his tendency to stir trouble made him a key player in Ashley's power structure. Luke was unpredictable, willing to cause chaos just for the thrill of it. Together, Ashley, Zach, Brianna, Courtney, and Luke formed an unbreakable circle, and for anyone who wasn't part of that group, Summit High was a place where you knew your place or risked becoming a target. As Maya walked through the crowded halls of Summit High on her first day, she couldn't help but notice Ashley and her group, who seemed to have their own gravitational pull. Students parted instinctively as Ashley made her way down the hallway, and Maya could feel the atmosphere shift. It was as though the very air around her changed when Ashley entered the scene. Maya glanced over for just a moment, catching Ashley's cold, calculating gaze. Ashley's eyes swept over her quickly, sizing her up, a silent warning that Maya was now being observed. Maya didn't react. She simply continued on, trying to ignore the unease crawling up her spine. Her locker was only a few feet away, but it felt like 1,000 eyes were on her. She quickly fumbled with the combination, aware that she was under scrutiny. Ashley's silent message was clear. She was a new girl, the outsider, and Ashley was going to make sure she knew her place. Maya wasn't used to this kind of attention. She had always been the one to fade into the background, never wanted to stand out. But as she closed her locker and moved towards her first class, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about her time at Summit High was about to change. She had no intention of making friends or drawing attention, but in the eyes of someone like Ashley, her silence was already a challenge, and Ashley would make sure to let her know it. The battle for dominance had already begun, and Maya had unknowingly stepped into a world where Ashley's power was absolute. The only question now was how long it would take before Maya would be forced to confront it. Maya Johnson had been at Summit High School for just a few days, but already she could feel the tension building. It wasn't just the usual stares and whispers she had grown accustomed to over the years. Something felt different about this school, especially with Ashley Adams and her group. Despite her best efforts to remain invisible, to slip through the crowded hallways unnoticed, Maya couldn't escape the silent attention that followed her. Every movement she made, every glance she took, seemed to be observed and scrutinized by those around her. It was a subtle, often uncomfortable gaze of those who found her different, the unspoken judgment that accompanied being the outsider. The whispers, though soft and low, made it clear that Maya was a puzzle to them, an enigma that didn't quite fit in. But it wasn't just the students' looks that bothered her. Ashley, the reigning queen of Summit High, had already taken an interest in her. Maya knew that Ashley didn't tolerate anyone who didn't fall in line with her version of the world. From the moment Ashley had laid eyes on Maya, she had marked her as a potential target. Maya could sense it. The sharp, calculating way Ashley sized her up, the way she looked at her with an air of superiority, as if Maya were just another pawn in her social game. Maya knew that Ashley's world was one built on control, and to Ashley, anyone who didn't submit to her power was a threat. Maya had been in situations like this before, and she knew the drill. Stay quiet, stay out of the way, and try not to attract attention. However, the more Maya tried to shrink into the background, the more Ashley seemed determined to drag her into the spotlight. It started small, snide remarks made just loud enough for Maya to overhear, mocking whispers as she passed by groups of students. At first, it seemed harmless, almost like a rite of passage for any new student who dared to step into Ashley's territory. But as the days wore on, the comments became sharper, more personal. Maya began to hear the familiar sting of cruel words about her appearance, about the way she dressed, the way she spoke. It was a constant reminder that her skin color, her background, her very existence in this environment marked her as different, as an outsider. Maya tried to keep her head down, her shoulders hunched in an attempt to avoid the verbal arrows that were being fired her way. But no matter how hard she tried to be invisible, there was no escaping reality of her situation. The whispers only grew louder, more malicious. Students began to talk about her behind her back, calling her out for her weird style, her tacky clothes, and her strange accent, as if she were some foreign creature in a zoo. At times, Maya found herself gripping her pencil so tightly that her knuckles would turn white, the urge to respond battling against her learned instinct to stay silent. But the silence wasn't enough for Ashley. It was becoming clear to Maya that Ashley's power didn't just lie in her popularity. It was in her ability to break people, to force them to react. And the more Maya stayed silent, the more she resisted showing any weakness, the more Ashley seemed determined to break her. Maya didn't want to be a part of this power struggle. She didn't want to engage with Ashley or her clique. All she wanted was to finish her senior year, without causing a scene, to get her diploma and move on. But Maya's silence had inadvertently become her own personal challenge to Ashley. Every moment she remained unaffected by Ashley's taunts was like a silent victory. And to Ashley, it was unbearable. Maya knew that the longer she kept this up, the more Ashley would push, testing her limits until she forced a reaction out of her. Maya's instincts told her that this battle was far from over. It had only just begun. Maya had always prided herself on her ability to stay calm, to remain silent and blend into background, but as she moved deeper into Summit High School, she quickly realized that her usual tactic wasn't going to work this time. Ashley Adams, the queen bee of the school, had already set her sights on Maya, and her icy, calculated gaze was the first sign of trouble. What started as a passing glance soon escalated into something much more sinister. Ashley and her clique had begun to notice Maya, and not in the friendly, welcoming way most new students hoped for. No, This was the scrutiny of a predator sizing up its prey. Despite Maya's best efforts to stay out of the limelight, the whispers had already begun to swirl around her. Her classmates would laugh, make snide comments just loud enough for her to hear, and though they were never direct, the meaning was unmistakable. She's the new girl from Chicago. Does she really dress like that? Is she really that quiet? Maya's skin prickled with discomfort every time she caught the tail end of a conversation about her. She had learned to endure the hurtful words over the years, but it was different now. The whispers fell heavier, like a constant weight bearing down on her shoulders. Ashley, however, wasn't content with mere whispers. Her challenge to Maya had already been set. As the days went by, it became clear that Ashley was testing Maya, trying to provoke a reaction, to break her in front of the entire school. Maya had always been able to fade into background, but now her silence wasn't enough. The more she ignored the taunts, the more Ashley seemed determined to push harder. Maya couldn't escape the feeling that Ashley was not just trying to humiliate her, but to destroy the very calmness that had always been her shield. This wasn't going to be an ordinary school year. Maya could feel the storm brewing, and she knew that sooner or later she would have to face it head-on. Maya had always been the type of person to retreat inward, especially when faced with adversity. She had learned early in life that staying silent was her best defense against the world around her. After all, a quiet presence meant no one could truly hurt her, right? But when Ashley Adams and her group began to target Maya, she couldn't help but feel as though that carefully crafted silence was starting to betray her. It started off as small jabs, casual whispers behind her back, snide remarks about her appearance, her clothes, her background. Maya tried to dismiss them, telling herself that they were just words, that they didn't matter. But deep down, she knew that Ashley wasn't going to stop with mere teasing. She had a different kind of power, one that came from control, and Maya wasn't the type to easily give in. Ashley had made it clear from the very beginning that she ruled Summit High School. The way she walked through the halls, her head high, her friends flanking her like soldiers in an army, made it clear that no one was allowed to cross her. It wasn't just her popularity that made her feared. It was the way she manipulated people, the way she could make someone feel small without ever saying a word. Maya, of course, had never been one to seek out conflict. She was content to stay in the shadows, to avoid confrontation at all costs. But Ashley wasn't about to let Maya slip under her radar so easily. She saw the quiet girl as a challenge, a threat to her power, and that was something Ashley couldn't tolerate. Maya could feel the shift in the air every time Ashley entered the room. It wasn't a physical change, but something deeper, something palpable. Ashley's presence commanded attention, and the energy in the room would immediately change. She had a way of making everyone else feel like they didn't matter unless they were standing in her orbit. Maya, however, couldn't be drawn into that orbit no matter how hard Ashley tried. Her indifference, her refusal to engage, only seemed to frustrate Ashley more. Maya wasn't the type to cry or lash out like so many others had when faced with Ashley's cruelty. She didn't react at all. And that silence, that refusal to show any vulnerability, was something Ashley couldn't understand. It wasn't like the other students who would shrink away or retaliate with anger. Maya simply refused to be a part of her game. It wasn't until lunchtime that Ashley decided to take matters into her own hands. Maya had already taken her usual spot, far away from the main group, sitting alone in the corner. It was a place where no one really paid attention to her, where she could eat in peace without the weight of people's eyes on her. But Ashley wasn't content to leave her alone. She saw Maya's solitary existence as an opportunity, a way to assert her dominance and send a message to the rest of the school. With a knowing smile, Ashley signaled to Brianna and Courtney, who immediately stood up and headed toward Maya's table. Maya had been trying her best to keep her head down and focus on the food in front of her, but she could feel the shift in the air as the trio approached. Brianna's laughter rang out, sharp and cutting, and Courtney's voice followed with a teasing remark that Maya didn't need to hear to understand. Maya's grip on her fork tightened, her heart racing. She knew exactly what was coming. Ashley, holding a cup of juice in her hand, walked slowly behind her friends, watching the scene unfold with a cold, calculating gaze. Maya, however, remained calm. She didn't look up, didn't flinch when Ashley's arm suddenly swiped across her tray, sending her food flying onto the floor. The juice spilled over the edge, staining her tray and splattering onto the table. A chorus of laughter erupted from the surrounding students, and for a brief moment, it seemed like Ashley had won. She leaned down, a malicious grin spreading across her face, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't see you." But Maya didn't react the way Ashley expected. She didn't jump up in anger or start crying. Instead, she sat perfectly still for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then, slowly, she placed her fork down on the tray, stood up, and walked with calm precision to the trash bin at the corner of the room. She didn't look back, didn't acknowledge anyone's stares, and without a single word, tossed her entire tray into the bin. The cafeteria fell into an eerie silence, one that felt like it had frozen in time. Maya's movements were deliberate and controlled, and as she returned to her seat, her gaze briefly met Ashley's. It wasn't a look of anger, but one of cold, unwavering calm. Maya didn't feel any triumph, but she knew something had shifted in that moment. She hadn't reacted the way Ashley expected, and that left Ashley uneasy. The power dynamic had shifted, if only slightly. Ashley's grin faltered, and for the first time, Maya saw something in Ashley's eyes, fear. The rest of the day passed with an uncomfortable tension. Ashley's usual confidence was no longer there. She sat with her friends, but something had changed. Her power, once absolute, had been slightly chipped away. Maya's refusal to react, her calmness in the face of humiliation, had unsettled Ashley, and that was something Ashley had never faced before. The whispers around the school began to shift, and this time they weren't about Maya's weakness. They were about her strength, her quiet defiance. Maya left the cafeteria feeling nothing but relief. She hadn't won the war, but she had made it clear that she wasn't going to be Ashley's victim. The battle had only just begun, and Maya knew it was far from over. But she had taken the first step toward standing up for herself, and that was more than she had ever done before. It wasn't about showing anger or weakness. It was about showing Ashley that her power was no longer absolute. And for the first time, Maya felt the weight of the world lift just a little. Maya's calm reaction to Ashley's bullying had thrown Ashley off in a way that no one had ever done before. For the first time, Ashley's power at Summit High School seemed to falter. The feeling of unease that had begun to grow inside her after Maya's defiant silence only deepened as the days went by. Ashley had always prided herself on being able to control any situation. Her beauty, her confidence, and the strength of her circle, composed of her loyal friends Brianna, Courtney, Zach, and Luke, had always been enough to keep everyone in line. But Maya, with her unsettling composure, was different. She wasn't like the other students Ashley had torn down with her words or manipulated into submission. Maya didn't react the way Ashley wanted, and that lack of response was becoming her greatest challenge. Ashley began to escalate her attempts to break Maya. She had to assert her dominance, prove to herself and the school that no one could go unpunished for daring to defy her. Every small act of cruelty, every remark made in the classroom or hallway, seemed to have no effect on Maya. If anything, Maya's silence only seemed to frustrate Ashley further. At every turn, she tried to provoke Maya in different ways, mocking her in front of her classmates, whispering insults loud enough for Maya to overhear, and even subtly moving her and her friends into Maya's space during gym class to make her uncomfortable. But each time, Maya remained composed. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry or fight back. She simply endured. And yet, the more Ashley pushed, the more she began to doubt her own ability to control the situation. Maya's unwavering silence had become a direct challenge to Ashley's carefully constructed image of power. It was as if Maya wasn't afraid of her at all, and that thought disturbed Ashley more than she was willing to admit. She had tried everything: emotional manipulation, subtle social pressure, even physical intimidation, but Maya stood her ground. The tension between the two girls reached its peak one afternoon during gym class. It was always a time when Ashley could showcase her influence over the students, especially with her brother Zach, the school star football player, by her side. Zach's presence alone had been enough to make most people fall in line. But when Zach and his friend Luke decided to target Maya during the warm-up, Ashley assumed that it would finally break her. She had witnessed Zach's strength and Luke's relentless energy, both of them intimidating enough to make anyone back down. But Maya didn't react the way they expected. When they tried to obstruct her path, bumping into her deliberately, Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she moved with astonishing agility, sidestepping their attempts with fluid precision. She remained silent, her face neutral, but in her movements, Ashley could sense a quiet power that she couldn't comprehend. Ashley's frustration reached a boiling point as Maya calmly walked away, undeterred by their provocations. The more Ashley watched, the more she realized that Maya wasn't afraid of her. Maya wasn't intimidated by the power her family wielded at Summit High. She was unshaken by the ridicule and isolation Ashley tried to impose on her. The silent defiance in Maya's demeanor was starting to chip away at Ashley's confidence. It was no longer just about bullying someone into submission. It was about maintaining control in the face of someone who refused to give in, and that terrified Ashley. As the days passed, the once unshakable power that Ashley had held over her peers seemed to wane. Whispers started to spread, and students began to look at Maya with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Ashley's attempts to bully Maya into submission had backfired, and now it was Ashley who was feeling the weight of uncertainty. For the first time in her life, she realized that there were people who could resist her control, and that realization was unsettling. Despite all the pressure, Maya continued to remain composed, never allowing Ashley to see the cracks in her facade. Maya wasn't interested in fighting Ashley for the top spot. She didn't want the power or the title of Queen Bee. She just wanted peace, and she wasn't about to let Ashley's cruelty define her. She understood that silence wasn't just an act of endurance. It was a weapon. It was her way of saying, "You won't break me." Ashley, on the other hand, was starting to feel the cracks in her empire. Maya's unshakable calm had rattled her so deeply that, for the first time, Ashley found herself questioning her own power. It was a feeling she had never allowed herself to feel before, and that was what scared her the most. The tension between Ashley Adams and Maya Johnson had reached its boiling point. For weeks, Ashley had tried everything to break Maya, but no matter what she did, whether it was the cruel comments, the subtle mockery, or even her group's physical intimidation, Maya remained unshaken. Ashley couldn't stand it. No one had ever resisted her control in this way before, and it drove her to escalate her efforts. She had to regain the power she once held over the school. It was a matter of pride. Ashley knew that if she didn't act decisively, she might lose the hold she had worked so hard to maintain. Her plan was simple. She would publicly humiliate Maya, make her the target of everyone's ridicule, and break her resolve once and for all. The perfect opportunity came during lunch. The cafeteria, with its crowded tables and bustling noise, was the ideal stage for Ashley's final act. She watched Maya take her usual seat at the farthest corner, trying to avoid the attention that always came with being the new girl. But that was precisely why Maya had to be targeted. Ashley had built her reputation on making others submit, and today, Maya would be no different. With a confident stride, Ashley signaled to Brianna and Courtney. Together, they headed toward Maya's table, and as they walked, Ashley held a cup of juice in her hand. The entire cafeteria watched the scene unfold, sensing that something was about to happen. Maya, as always, sat calmly, unaware of the impending drama. The moment Ashley reached her table, she bumped into Maya's shoulder with all her might, spilling the juice across the table and onto Maya's food. Laughter erupted from the surrounding students as Ashley feigned surprise, delivering her sarcastic apology loud enough for everyone to hear. But what Ashley hadn't anticipated was how Maya would react. Instead of the expected outburst, Maya simply sat still for a moment, processing what had just happened. Her face remained calm, almost eerily composed. Slowly, she stood up, collected her tray, and walked to the trash bin with quiet determination, throwing the entire meal away. The cafeteria fell into a tense silence. No one had ever seen someone react like this before. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. And that silence was the most powerful statement she could have made. Ashley stood frozen, her smug smile faltering for the first time. She hadn't expected this. Maya wasn't the weak target she had imagined. She had unknowingly triggered something inside Maya, something deeper than her control could ever reach. This was no longer just about proving who was in charge. It was a fight for respect, and Ashley had underestimated her opponent. The days that followed Maya's calm defiance in the cafeteria only seemed to intensify the animosity between her and Ashley. Maya's refusal to react to Ashley's bullying had created an invisible but undeniable shift in the power dynamic at Summit High School. It was clear that Ashley had never faced anyone like Maya before, and the uncertainty that followed started to unravel the very foundation of Ashley's control. Maya's silence was no longer just an act of endurance. It was a challenge to Ashley's authority, a quiet but profound rejection of the world Ashley had so carefully built around herself. Ashley had always been in charge, always in control over who was in her orbit and who was out. She reveled in the power she held over the students, and her group, Brianna, Courtney, Zach, and Luke, only added to that sense of invincibility. With them by her side, no one dared to defy her. But Maya was different. Maya didn't need to follow the unspoken rules that Ashley had set. She didn't care about fitting in or being part of Ashley's social hierarchy. And this was exactly what made Ashley so uneasy. Maya wasn't afraid of her. That was something Ashley couldn't understand. For years, she had controlled the school with an iron fist, making people bow to her whims, breaking them if they ever stepped out of line. But Maya didn't respond the way everyone else did. Maya didn't break. The tension between the two girls grew, and it didn't take long for Ashley to escalate her tactics. She had to do something to prove that she still had control. Maya couldn't just go on ignoring her. This time, Ashley wasn't going to rely on subtlety. She would force Maya to react. But Maya's refusal to show any emotion in the face of her actions only made Ashley more determined. Every moment of Maya's composed silence felt like a public challenge to Ashley's reign. By the time the next week rolled around, Ashley knew she needed to make a more direct move. Her patience had run thin, and her pride was beginning to crack. She decided to make Maya feel completely out of place, to humiliate her in front of everyone. The plan was simple: gym class. It was one of the few times during the day when Ashley and her friends could flex their influence without hesitation. The gym was the ultimate proving ground, and was where Ashley had often asserted her dominance over others. But she had underestimated Maya once again. As the students gathered for the warm-up, Ashley and her friends, led by Zach, made their way over to Maya. Zach, the star athlete and Ashley's older brother, always had the power to dominate a space, and with him by her side, no one dared to challenge Ashley. But this time, things were different. Maya, who typically stayed to the edge, remained still in the corner of the gym, trying to blend in and avoid the spotlight. It wasn't long before Zach, with his usual arrogant grin, began to interfere with Maya's movements. Each time she tried to run a lap, he would slow down just enough to obstruct her path, forcing her to adjust her pace. Luke, always eager to join in on Ashley's cruel games, followed suit. He purposefully bumped into Maya, knocking her off balance, but not enough to draw attention from the teacher. The entire gym seemed to watch the scene unfold, with students laughing softly at their antics. Ashley, standing in the corner with Brianna and Courtney, watched Maya's every move carefully. She expected Maya to snap, to show some sign of weakness. But instead, Maya remained unfazed. She didn't flinch when they bumped into her. Her eyes stayed forward, her breathing steady, even as Zach continued to intentionally block her path. Ashley's frustration grew. This wasn't the reaction she was used to. Normally, when she targeted someone, it didn't take much to break them. Whether it was anger, tears, or the embarrassment of a public meltdown, she knew how to make people bow down to her. But Maya wasn't breaking. And with each passing minute, Ashley's frustration turned into a growing sense of fear. Maya wasn't like the others. She wasn't cracking under pressure. Maya was resisting. She was pushing back in the only way she knew how, by staying calm. Maya had learned from her father that power wasn't about reacting or getting angry. It was about keeping control over yourself in the face of provocation. Her martial arts training had instilled in her the value of emotional control. She wasn't going to give Ashley the satisfaction of a dramatic reaction, and she wasn't going to let her behavior dictate how she responded to every little challenge. The bullying, the physical interference, the words, they meant nothing to her unless she allowed them to. The gym class ended with Maya leaving the field quietly, without a word. Ashley watched her go, her mind racing with confusion and mounting discomfort. She was used to dominating everyone who stood in her way, and yet Maya's indifference made her feel helpless. Something inside her shifted. The power she had so easily wielded was now slipping through her fingers. The more she tried to provoke Maya, the more she realized she wasn't dealing with someone who could be easily manipulated or controlled. For the first time in her life, Ashley wasn't sure if she could win, and that realization terrified her.